We view the universe as something which is or which happens outside of us, and which would do so even if we were not here to witness it. I want to present a simple argument that goes against this view, an argument against the independence of the universe and for the dependence of the universe on our awareness or some awareness of it. And let me start with an illustration, maybe the most radical illustration that I can think of what this would imply. This represents the history of the universe, and the view that I'm putting forward would say, supposing that there has been um, no life in the universe before there was life on Earth. Well, we would then have to say that the universe, including its whole history, did not actually start existing before life began, um, and that it acquired this whole history, retroactively, so to speak. Okay, and here I say life, but of course I mean awareness or consciousness or however we want to call it. And I realized that this view is not how things are usually presented or how we think of them. It's a way of seeing things that has seemed obvious to me for a long time, but um, which, when spoken out, still sounds bizarre. I realize the thesis more generally, and I don't think it's a particularly new or original thesis, is to say that consciousness or awareness is a condition of existence, that things don't don't exist without there being an awareness of them. And that, of course, though this is not the emphasis of the argument, that also there is no argument without there's no awareness without it being an awareness of something. um this doesn't mean, of course, that if you put mustard in the fridge that you don't see it anymore, that the mustard stop existing. And it doesn't mean that even if you forget that it's there, um that again it doesn't exist, because a little bit like we did with the universe, when you do eventually, or someone opens the fridge, the mustard has some effect on the awareness involved here, and sort of gains or regains its whole depth. It has, if it's there, it has to have been it has to have existed. And but if we if if there was a mustard in the fridge and you forgot about it, and then there was some sort of and then for some reason all life form, all consciousness was eradicated, um and so that there was never any it never the mustard never, so to speak, hit awareness again, then yes, we would have to say that the mustard stopped existing. Okay, and I realize that the language here kind of contradicts itself, stops existing as if things were continuing, um, but there's just no more history there, right? Or you could also say that again, that you could also say that being in the fridge, even if you're not aware of it, the mustard has some the presence of the mustard. Well, yes, the fact that the mustard has some effects on indirect effects on the world of which you or we are aware of. For instance, maybe it affects, I don't know, however faintly, like the electric consumption of the fridge, or it has some sort of effect, which in some indirect sense keeps the mustard actual. Before I actually because this is a thesis and this is not the argument. Before I move on to the argument, let me maybe go with a final illustration of what the thesis implies, and this is maybe the first time that I've thought of things this way, is after hearing this question, which is repeated, and I don't know where it comes from, which says, or which asks, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? There is there's an answer to this, which I find quite satisfying. That says, well, this depends on what you mean by sound. If you mean by sound that something is heard or something heard, well, then by definition, then no, the falling of the tree in the forest did not make a sound. But if by this you mean like the movement of air in some scientific sense or physical sense, the like perturbations in the air or whatever, however you want to describe what sound is physically, then you would say, well, yes, even if there was no one around to be conscious of it, it happened. But my thesis here, the view here that I'm putting forward, would would deny that. Would say, if really there was no form of consciousness, and then we suppose here that that plants have no form of consciousness. If there was no form of consciousness, um, um, that was aware of the falling of the tree, then no, it didn't happen. But for this to be the case, the falling of the tree would have to happen on some deserted planet, which, because of space, would be cut off. Like the physical effects of the effects of the falling of the tree would be cut off from any form of awareness, so that it would never reach awareness, because if a tree falls on Earth, even if there's no animal, no people around to take note of it, there's eventually the fallen tree will be encountered, and then again sort of regain, um, for there to for the tree to be there and fallen, it has to have fallen, and so regains its history like this. Or again, if you want to put it that way, you could also say that falling the tree falling will have physical effects, which, however faint, however indirect, will eventually have an effect that will reach, consciousness. And in that sense, well, yes, then you would have to say, yes, it happened. Okay. um, the form of the argument that I want to propose is something I've read or heard somewhere, I think, but the perfunctory search on the internet did not reveal the origin of this argument. So, but it's commonsensical enough, which so it is simply to say that simply enough to say that two things do not um, actually exist distinctly from one another if you cannot imagine them separated one from the other. I don't think that this argument is particularly strong. It can probably be, it can, well, probably, I think it can be attacked in maybe uh, multiple ways. But I'm gonna suppose that the argument here is valid. Okay. Apart, besides, of course, saying that this is a phenomenological argument, so an argument for which the criteria is experience, um, which is maybe complacent considering what we're our topic here. But in fact, the our argument is just a specification of the of the of the form of the argument that I just presented, and it is to say that that is in fact not possible to imagine anything without it being under some sort of perspective, without it being situated, given some context, made sense of, right? And this is sense here, not only in the sense of meaning, but also in the sense, like, just in the sense of our five senses, in the sense of, some kind of format, right? And the word I want to use here is realize, right? That everything has to be realize. So this refers to some kind of act of awareness, right? Or event of awareness. And I like that word obviously because of its proximity to the term reality. Um, so that something has to be um, seen, maybe we could say, um, for it to be there. And of course, obviously, for there to be any seeing, there has to be something seen, of course. Um, so it goes both ways. Um, and this is it. This is the argument. Without attacking like the form of the argument, um, which we suppose here is valid, we I can still maybe move through a couple of possible counter arguments. The first one here would be an argument on the basis of how we speak, which is something I guess I would be normally quite sensitive to. But here I would say, so if we were to say, well, we speak of things as separate from awareness of them, and then first of all, I would say, well, what does that mean? Like, of course, we don't speak of the mustard in the fridge as dependent on our awareness of it, but in a sense, it is sort of implicit in its being there, I would say. And if we want to say that, well, we speak of things, you know, um, uh, we speak of things, we can speak of things abstractly. I would still say, well, yeah, but there's still there would still be some kind of performative contradiction here if you want to say like we speak or we think of things abstractly, so we can do that um, without them, without our actually concretely experiencing them. Well, sure, but then the speaking and the thinking of it is also a form of awareness, right? Some way of considering something. And um, right. So and we could push that argument and maybe put it onto a different form and saying, well, we have been able to discover, not create, right? We have been able to discover many things about the universe, including its history, as we've seen above, that we've mentioned above, or many other things that we didn't know were there but had to have been there through science, right? So we are able to consider things generally, abstractly, objectively, right? But again, um, if you can treat or speak of things objectively, it's still, there still has to be still an object to a subject, right? If you want to use that kind of language, and again, if you you could say, and this is what I want to say, that like everything that we've discovered in um, uh, didn't actually exist before it had at least indirect effects on awareness. For example, if you want to speak of atoms, that we didn't know there were atoms for a long time, but they have to have still been there, and I would say yes, indirectly, of course. Although I would say that atoms, as atoms, before they were conceptualized, right, which is just another way to say the to say realized, the term I used earlier. Um, Before they were conceptualized, in a way, atoms didn't exist directly as atoms, right? But of course, they did exist. They still had actual existence because, um, but again, there's some sort of retroaction, right? That's going on here. Um, but perhaps this is pushing it uh, further already than I would like to go. And the last point I would like to mention is something else, which is, you know, which could present itself as a kind of counter argument. Okay, at least a counter argument to perhaps our first example when we said that the universe, in a sense, did not actually exist before there was some awareness to be aware of it. Um, and the counter argument would be to say, well, there's some sort of universal consciousness that uh, comes with the universe, right? Which would start at the same time as the universe, okay, um, and maintain its existence independently of our or any like specific life form's awareness of the universe. And in a way, that already concedes the thesis, right? So if you want to say like there, okay, if you want to say okay, there has to be a kind of consciousness for there to be things, for things to actually exist, but there is some kind of universal consciousness that does that work for us. uh, so to give us like already a foundation, in a way you've already conceded the thesis, right? That existence, that a condition of existence, one condition of existence or a condition of existence is consciousness. And also perhaps more importantly, we don't need that, right? Like it doesn't, um because this is sometimes presented as, or I feel like it has been presented as a consequence maybe of the thesis, to say that if things, in order to exist, um, uh, must be taken notice of, um, then because we have to have had like this whole history of the universe, then and of, everything we are not aware of has to, exist somehow, then we need some kind of like consciousness that would do that work always. um but we don't, right? That's kind of the point. Is the point is that if, and I come back to this, if there has not been any life before, for instance, life on Earth, then it is not really a problem for there to still be a history of the universe, okay, which maybe didn't have its depth before, uh, before we were aware of it, but then does acquire this depth, right? It's just that there's no, um, it's not an event before it is realized again. Now, this, of course, can be called idealism, though I don't know if, I don't know. I don't see why it would not be, equally realism in a sense, because we are also saying, there must be things for there to be an awareness of them, right? So they come together, right? Um, though I'm not sure if somebody who would defend realism would like that. Um, but the point, even if we want to, even if we want to talk, I don't know, about possible illusions and stuff, the kind of philosophical thought experiment that goes around. If what we are aware of is an illusion, it's still, there has to be this, the illusion is still there, right? There still has to be something there. And so awareness is always, um, of something. So there's always the universe, there's always reality, right? And now, if we also, perhaps another accusation that would come up would be to say, like, well, this is anthropocentrism, right? Well, I don't know that it isn't that, but of course, it depends on how you define consciousness and how you restrict it, and that's sort of an open question, and an entirely much more difficult question. But yeah, so this was my simple argument, against the against the independence of the universe or of things or reality or however you want to call it. Thanks.